Hi guys, Laura here with STP, and today I have two very special guests on our channel, Roger and Anjali. They are basically the most amazing students I've ever had, and they actually now tutor with me on our STP tutor team. So they're here today because they just took the March SAT this morning, so they're going to fill us in on all the juicy details of what the test was like. So welcome guys. Thanks for coming on.
Wait, are we like introducing ourselves?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so why don't you guys let them know a little bit about you? Like, tell them a little bit about your SAT journey. You know, what were you scoring? What did you end up scoring, and all that good stuff?
Yeah. So my name is Roger Brooks. I'm from here, Binghamton, New York. I started my SAT journey about a year ago today. I started off with a 1380, I believe was my original score. And then I worked with Laura immediately after taking that for about a month.
He is smart. It was a good move.
And she helped me bring up my score 150 points. And I got a 1530, and then now I work for her as a tutor.
You work with me, you don't work with
Yes,
me.
I work with.
with.
Hi guys, my name is Anjali Patel. I am here at Vestal, and I took the PSAT and SAT and scored around the 1300s. And I also went to Laura right after.
Smart woman.
And we had one-on-one private sessions, and she helped me jump almost 200 points to around a 1510. And now I work with her as a tutor, or as STP. Sorry.
So before we get started, if you haven't yet, make sure you hit the subscribe button and notification bell below, because we come out with videos every single week to help you improve your SAT score and get into the school of your dreams. What did you think about the digital SAT versus the paper test? Like, what's your overall impression?
I think there's pros and cons to each one. For example, the paper SAT, I definitely don't like the reading the entire passage and then answering questions format. But at the same time, the shorter passage on the digital SAT makes it a little bit trickier because you have to really delve deep into the passage, and kind of every sentence is important. I also really like DESMOS, that's a really good help. But then also Module 2 was much more difficult on the digital SAT compared to the paper SAT. So there's very pros and cons to each one, but it went pretty good.
Okay.
I agree. I think there definitely are pros and cons. For me, I think the paper test, what I liked about it is that it was a set test for everyone. Everyone had the same set of questions, versus on the digital SAT, the test accommodates your ability. So if you did well in Module 1, Module 2 was harder. And in my opinion, I think it was just a bit unfair to some people because it makes it harder for people to do well.
Tell me about the testing environment, because I didn't get to go in and take it today, which, I mean, I'm not bitter about this, but apparently I could take the test. So what I want to know is, you know, just for when we work with students in the future, for people that are watching that haven't taken the SAT yet, do you have to fill out paperwork when you get there, or is everything all done because you pre-registered on your device?
So usually a few nights before or the night before, you pre-register on BLUEBOOK. And when you get to the testing site and obviously check into your room that you're testing in, all you have to really do is just press continue, and they just tell you about the different resources you're offered, like the annotation, the highlighting, the math reference sheet. So there's no paperwork to fill out, and the time that comes before the test, where they usually read out all the rules and regulations, is much shorter, so you can get started right away, which I think was much more efficient.
That's really nice. And so Roger, this next one will go to you. How much paper did they give you?
One sheet of paper. I got one blank printer paper. That's all they gave.
One lonely piece of
Yes,
paper.
exactly.
College Board. Come on, why are you being so cheap? You can give them more than one piece of paper.
Now, you can get extra paper. They said, so you have to write your name at the top right of the scrap paper. They tell you that. And then they said, if you want extra paper, you just ask, and you have to write your name on those extra sheets of paper as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. So for all you out there watching, I would say advocate for yourself, right? So like, see if you can ask before the test starts for more, so you're not raising your hand during the test and wasting valuable time trying to get more sheets of paper.
Yeah.
Do you guys think that if they ask for more in advance, like the proctor would accommodate? Did you get that impression?
Definitely. I think so.
Okay, that's good.
I don't think there's any issue. I think they probably just don't want to waste paper that they won't use, you know? I assume that's why, but.
Yeah, they're concerned about the trees. So like, what's the deal with the breaks? Because my concern is, oh my gosh, like what if I get done early? Like, can I get up and walk around, or is that distracting to other people? Like, how did they manage that?
So when you do have extra time left on any section, you have to wait until the timer runs out to 0. And then for the 2 modules for the English section, you don't get a break. It just takes you right to module 2. But in between the English and math, you do get a 10-minute break, and you can walk up and get out of the classroom. But because people are starting at different times, obviously the breaks don't align with each other. And so it might be a little bit distracting in the hallways, hearing like that conversation or people just talking and walking around the hallways.
And they left the doors open too.
Yeah, they don't close the classroom
doors.
doors.
So there was commotion going on outside the room, and I was like,
That's something interesting too. Like, and I feel like for all of you guys watching at home, like this goes back to like knowing your rights as a student taking the test, because I have a feeling that like that's not proper procedure. I think that's something that you could probably ask them to close the door. It's just being brave enough to be like, hey, could you close the door? Here's another thing I was wondering. Because you're not using bubble sheets, can you bring pens and write on the scrap paper with pens, or are you only allowed to use pencils?
So I walked in with a pen just to see what would happen, and they don't specify at all whether you need a pen or a pencil, so I just assumed a pen would be fine.
Okay.
And they're not checking your scrap paper at all, so yeah, you can bring a pen.
Wow, I have so many students that are going to be so happy about that, because they have sensory issues with pencils. Like some kids that I worked with hate using pencils.
Okay.
I don't know if you guys have ever encountered that with any of your students yet, but it's like a regular thing for me. Is there anything a student who hasn't taken the new digital SAT should know, aside from the few questions I just asked, before they go in there?
Just obviously don't assume that module 1 and module 2 line up. So I would say if module 1 went really well for you, I wouldn't let your confidence take over and expect module 2 to be like a walk in the park, because it wasn't for me. But I also think it was really helpful to have like the time sitting right there to see and like rely on, because you're not checking your watch, you're not wasting time trying to see how much time you have left.
Right.
So I think that's like a breather for new students that might not have taken the digital yet.
Next question, and this goes to both of you. You know, this is like a personal preference when you're testing, but scrap paper or annotating tool in BLUEBOOK? Go.
Absolutely scrap paper.
Yep.
You agree? Yep.
For sure. I think for me, annotating just seemed like it would take longer to get the tool set up and then highlight what you want written down, versus just like scribbling what you want on your piece of paper, labeling what question it was, and just referring back to that. I'm just also more of a paper person personally than I am digital.
Okay, so on the same token, hide the clock or show the clock? Go.
Show the clock. I love seeing how much time I have left, so I don't have to like think in the back of my mind, do I need to rush or not? But when the 5 minutes do come up, the clock turns to red, kind of like make it a little bit stressful. Yeah. So that can be a little bit more intimidating for some people, and I don't like that. But I like having the clock to rely on.
I also show the clock just because, it makes me feel more comfortable just knowing where I'm at. You do, regardless if you want to hide it or show it, it will show after 5 minutes, like no matter what. And it'll be red and it'll like have a notification there are 5 minutes left. But I also think like if it makes you anxious to see the clock the whole time, like I think it would be fine to turn off the clock. And you can also just easily show it and then hide it just to see. So I think it's just your preference. But yeah, I show the clock.
Yeah, you guys are a bunch of weirdos. I definitely want to hide that clock. I don't know. There's something about it ticking down that's distracting to me. So I think the important thing is coming up with a plan of like how often you want to show the clock so that you can at least see where you're at, because if you hide the clock, you don't want to like forget about it. You know what I mean? Like it might be nice in the middle of the module if you have 22 questions, maybe at question 11. To check to see, you know, do you have 16 minutes left? Are you halfway? You know what I mean? Were there any, now we can't talk specifics with the questions, right? I mean, if you guys want to go on a Reddit thread and check out questions, feel free, but we're really not supposed to do that. But I guess at the end of the day, in general, were there any questions on the test that surprised you? And when I say that, what I mean really is that weren't on any of the Blue Book exams, practice tests, that weren't in the College Board question bank. Like, was there anything that came up for you that was like, oh, this is new?
Yes, there were. Both involving just advanced geometry, I would say.
Oh, interesting.
Unlike any I've really ever seen before. So I think that's what I'll say.
For English, I think everything, if you would take a Blue Book practice exam, the setup is the same. You have the same types of grammar questions or comparing text 1 to text 2. So English was pretty straightforward. The layout's basically the same, but yeah, I do agree for math. There were a few that I haven't seen like that type of setup or knew what type of formula to basically use.
Was there any other type besides geometry that you could think of? Or was it basically, do you agree with Roger, it was geometry?
I agree mostly with geometry. There was one like linear type of equation, which I couldn't figure out one of the variables to. Yeah.
So actually, this kind of goes in the next question, since the variety is coming in the math, right, you guys? Like, give me a percentage. How often do you think you use DESMOS? With 0% being you didn't use it at all, and 100% being you used it on every single question?
I feel like it definitely depends on the test you're given. So definitely like systems of equations or inequalities, I use DESMOS for those hands down. It's a lot more efficient. So I think overall for the math, I would say I used it for like 40% of it, only because you wouldn't need it for the rest of it.
Right.
But whenever like there was an opportunity to use it, I would use it for sure.
Okay, now I'm not kidding. I was also going to say 40%.
Wow! You guys are so simpatico!
So, I mean, I agree, and I feel like it also depends like what you can do in your head kind of a thing. Like there were definitely a lot of questions that I could have used DESMOS for, but just to save time, I knew I could just like kind of look at it and try and figure it out without using DESMOS. But so yeah, 40% I used, but like what are you able to use? I would say like 70 to 80%. You can plug a lot into DESMOS and use it.
That's right.
You can also use it to check your work. When I was checking back my work for Module 1, I had a lot more time, so anything that you could plug back into like a graph to see maybe like a maximum or minimum value, anything like that, it helps check your work and like reassure that you're correct.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna like add on to what you guys both said about the percentage of DESMOS, because I agree with you. I'm about 40% too. Some of my colleagues that are like in the NTPA with me, they have said 70% for DESMOS. But I find that there are some times where it's just like common sense needs to apply, where it's just much easier to just do it without. But I find like the ones towards the end of the modules is a good time. The systems of equations is a good time. Anytime where you have a constant like an A, B, or C, because you throw it into DESMOS and you can use the slider to move the constant to what you need it to be. Those are usually when I use it too. So I'm like definitely in alignment with you guys on the DESMOS thing. What do you think was the toughest part of the English sections?
For me, it was text 1 and text 2. They give you 2 different texts and they want to make a comparison maybe between the authors or the purpose or the idea. And it just confused me, just like the way they word each text. Both of them used a lot of like harder wording than you did, like you really needed to, basically. They made it more complicated than it was needed to be, and it was just unnecessarily difficult to answer.
Yeah, and I want to follow up with that. So like, when you approached that one, did you read all of it? Did you just like look for the claims in them and then compare? Like, how did you end up tackling it? Did you annotate? Like, what did you end up doing?
I tried to read just one text, focus on what that one meant before moving on to the second one. But I couldn't even figure out what text one meant, so comparing them made it so much harder.
Wow, was this in Module 2?
Yeah, it was.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because a lot of the times when they put it in Module 1, it's like pretty straightforward, as you guys have seen, but that's interesting. Okay.
That was also tricky for me. It's just weird because it's almost like they're not even testing comparison of texts because it was so hard to understand, even one of them. So it was more like I was trying to get the main idea rather than trying to compare them.
Wow, yeah.
But with that one, I marked it for review and came back, and I only had like a minute and a half to finish it. So I was just like, I skimmed both and then I did my best. But what I do want to highlight about this one that I noticed is that I think main idea questions were just a bit trickier than paper, because paper gives you have like a page and a half worth of story, but this you have a paragraph. So to get the main idea from the paragraph, it's hard to see what the entire, generalized statement is for a little paragraph compared to a whole passage.
So on the paper test, when they asked about the main idea of a paragraph, it was so easy because they always put it where you think the topic sentence would go. It would be the first sentence of the paragraph, and now it's like it could be anywhere. I would like to hear actually what you guys thought was the hardest part of the English. I mean, do you agree with these guys with that comparative text 1, text 2? Please comment below and let us know what you thought of the English and where you really struggled. All right, so the next question is because this has been a huge sticking point for pretty much everybody since they changed the test. Vocabulary. Everybody is saying, these vocabulary questions, I don't know the words, this is so much harder. Like, in your opinion, how difficult was the words and context vocabulary part of this test?
I think for a few of them, for me, my strategy wasn't to figure out which every word meant. It was more of a process of elimination aspect. Because usually there were a few that I could just say, like, I know what these mean.
Right.
And then the one that I think was probably the right answer, I didn't really know.
Yeah.
But with process of elimination, you just use a different strategy and you can get like the right answer. So,
can I follow up with you on that? Did you find that the one that you didn't know often was the right answer?
Yeah. Exactly.
I'm finding that too.
Yeah.
Like, even on the practices, it's like the one word you don't
I didn't know
is right, which is the opposite of the paper, right? Do you guys remember how the paper one, it was usually the simple word that you did know, but everybody was picking the hard word because they thought, it's the SAT. It really is like the word you don't know a lot of the times.
Yeah. In my mind, I was like, I know what this word means. It definitely must be like one of like a contender for the answer. And then I read all the rest of them and I'm like, none of them make sense besides that one that I just don't know means. So that typically on the test for me, that's how it worked.
It's funny because I've been working with a student now, and she always picks the one that she'll get it down to 2. And she'll always pick the one that she knows, but it's always the one that she won't know. So I've been noticing that pattern as well.
Yeah.
I would say it wasn't I feel like I saw worse vocab on the Blue Book. Some worse, some not. So when you got in, I think it was the first question was a vocabulary question.
It was.
And that one was pretty straightforward. But then as you kept going, it would get harder and harder.
Right.
And again, I also used process of elimination, sort of in the way that I could tell that the other 3 answers were, say, like a positive tone. And then I could tell that the other one was a negative tone. And I could also kind of tell that it needed a negative tone, so that's how I pinpointed the vocab.
Yes, that's so clutch. I love that strategy. I really do. Okay, cool. If you could go back in time and study one thing before taking this test, what would it be? Let's start with Roger this time.
The questions that were really stumpy were sort of specific, so there wasn't really a broad general category.
Okay.
But if I were to pick one, I would review unit circle.
Oh my gosh.
Unit circle. Okay, you guys heard it here. You should start reviewing unit circle for sure. That's a concept on the test.
I deeply want to know what the answer to that question
Yes.
was, so I would have studied unit circle. Yeah.
I will definitely follow up. Unit circle, I feel like you don't even review it much in school as it is.
Right.
It's passed over so often, so just having that in your mind is really well. And then I think I would do a lot with vocabulary, honestly.
Yeah.
It makes you more confident to know, like, oh, I do know what that one means. The one that, like, seems to always be the answer. If you know what that one is, it just reassures, oh, that definitely is the right one.
Yeah, I agree. I almost feel like just to add on to what both of you guys said, like if anybody is watching this video and you're like, wow, they use DESMOS for 40% of the test, how? You need to work on DESMOS. So that would probably be something that I would add into the mix, like, because you can use it in so many ways, and I feel like that's something we don't use in school either, really, most schools. So like knowing the capabilities and what you can do with it is really important, and I think that really moves the needle on your math score. Okay, last question. So what's your biggest advice to students trying to do well on the digital SAT?
One thing to keep in mind is don't let like the way the modules are structured make you lose confidence in yourself. For me, we mentioned so much about how module 1 and module 2 differ, but I think what's important is like not let it affect your mindset going into it, because you see module 1 being easy, module 2 maybe being difficult, or vice versa, and it makes your mind think, oh, like now I'm just not going to do well in module 2, it's just going to bring my score down. It is tolerable to get through it, and if you do like zone in and focus and read in depth, or try and like remember as much as you can about like formulas, you can get a good score on both. I think it's just important to not like let how the modules are like structured basically just convince yourself that you're gonna do well or do poor.
Yeah, I think that that's a good point, because I feel like taking the test is like 50% psychology, 50% knowing, like knowledge, like going in there with your game face on, with a positive attitude, and like not letting module 2 intimidate you, right, is important. And like at the end of the day, yes, module 2 is much more difficult, but you have to keep in mind everybody feels that way. I mean, the goal is just to get on the good side of the curve, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Yeah,
It's like you like increase the weight by like 100 pounds and you're like, okay, it's just, it gets really hard really quickly, but it's not impossible. So I agree, don't lose confidence in yourself. Also, I would say get comfortable with DESMOS, just because you can use it with a lot, but you have to know what you can use it with. So get comfortable with knowing what you can use it with, because you can get the answer like really quickly just by looking at it. I would also say study vocabulary if you can. Like if you have time, like extra time, I would be studying vocabulary, just because it can help not only with the strict vocabulary questions, but also just knowing good vocabulary will help you understand the passages more if they have a stronger vocab.
Yeah, and I want to plug something now that you mentioned it. So our Preply app, we just released a new version with vocabulary flashcards. So if you guys don't have the mobile app yet, you should go get it, because you can start studying. They're like the highest probability vocabulary words that show up on the SAT. So definitely check that out. I'll put a link in the description below, and we'll put a link up here right now so you can go get Preply.
Going back to what Roger said about DESMOS, it is extremely helpful, but don't rely on it too much. Like, don't go into the test saying, oh, I have DESMOS, I've got this, because you do have to know exactly what you're using it for. And there are questions where you're not going to need like a graphing calculator or like a calculator. You're just going to need to know, what formula am I solving for? What topic of math is this? So I would make sure there's a balance between relying on it and knowing how to use it.
Yeah, so, you guys, if you found this video helpful today, make sure to hit the like button below, and keep in mind, these two guys tutor. So if you feel like you need a little bit of extra support, definitely reach out to us. We would love to work with you. We can walk you through like how to use DESMOS. We can walk you through different strategies for each type of question, so you have more of a game plan and you don't feel like you're on a bicycle going downhill and the handlebars flew off. Do you know what I mean? Like you want to feel like you've got some handlebars on your bike. So we'll put a link down in the description below. You can just fill out a form or subscribe to our email list at our website, and we'll be in touch. So with that, guys, thanks so much for coming on today. I'm so happy that we had you. Your insights were amazing and super helpful. So thank you guys both for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Until next time, guys, happy prepping.